Welcome to the Sales versus Marketing podcast. My name's Scott, and today we are speaking with Alfie Isa Marsh. He is the head of US sales for Spendesk. Spendesk is a platform focused on optimizing finances within organizations. It's a SaaS platform. Alfie is a tenured sales leader. He has built both the UK and now US sales team up from scratch at Spendesk. Spendesk, when he first joined, was 20 people large. They have over 100 people now, and they just recently closed a rather large series of funding. So they're doing quite well. They're expanding. So I'm very, very excited to speak with Alfie and get his insight on how to scale a SaaS sales team, and how to build a community, how to identify your ideal customer profile, how to find product market fit. Alfie has been through Spendesk as they have literally done it all. So without further ado, Alfie, give us a little bit of background about where you came from, coming from Bloomberg over to SaaS sales, and what Spendesk is doing.
Sure. So you can probably tell a little bit by my accent that I'm from the UK. So I was born and raised in London, in a place called Enfield. And so I've pretty much been there for most of my life, other than when I went to university in the north of England. And so when I graduated, I went straight into Bloomberg. So my kind of background was very based around finance. I studied accounting and finance at university. I always wanted to get into investment banking. I thought that's where all the money was, and so on and so forth. And I think I was probably like a lot of young people seeing the 2007, 2008 crash and reading most of the headlines about all the bankers making lots of money and thinking, oh, that sounds great, we should go into that industry. And I think obviously going into that industry straight out of uni, this was a very rude awakening. That's not quite the case. But nonetheless, that's where my kind of initial interest as a 15, 16-year-old kind of kid going into that world started with in trading and finance. I sort of soon realized that there's a big difference between like what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and where you can really leverage your skill sets. And I think that I've always been a sociable person. I always was in sales roles, kind of informal jobs, Saturday jobs, and that sort of stuff when I grew up. And so I kind of went down that route within Bloomberg. And so I started selling trading solutions and to banks and hedge funds. And that was kind of like my main focus. I then was there for about 3 years and then decided I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to move away from a large corporation. There's about 20,000 employees there. And the way I saw the company was, it was about 20, 30 years in the making. They got a whole monopoly over the market, and it was very defensive in terms of the sales. So you'd hear all these stories from all the old guys that had been there for 20, 30 years and talking about the good old days when there was a couple of hundred people and they just started making out and the whole market was there to go after. And I thought that's exactly the sort of thing that I want to get a part of. And so I decided I want to go and work in a startup. I wanted to go and work in sales. I wasn't too fussed if it was in a kind of a fintech environment, but more just in a startup and quite open-minded. At the time, as I actually met my partner at Bloomberg, and we both quit and then decided to move countries. And so we moved to Paris, and so managed to come across Spendesk, which was a very, very kind of lucky opportunity of a great mix of fintech background, SaaS, and then sales. Mm-hmm. And they hired me as the first English or native English speaking person in the company, and the first person to go and then look after the UK market, where we then have grown that onto then. So that's just a little bit of background, I guess, into where I've come from.
That's really good. Now, did you have trouble, because you went to Bloomberg, so that makes sense, so the financial background, but SaaS sales is a whole other beast coming from Bloomberg. And I'm thinking of like the financial guys that I know, and they're hard workers, but they don't know SaaS sales. It's a very different job. So I'm curious how you were so successful and like ramped up so quickly. Like, where did you learn to do SaaS?
Yeah, well, the short answer is on the job.
Yeah, always.
You're right. It was a very humbling, rude awakening to go into that environment. I think that I've always been the sort of person to kind of jump headfirst into the deep end and kind of see what happens. But when you do that, yeah, it can be quite a shock sometimes. So I mean, the environment I came from when I was working at Bloomberg in a sales environment. I mean, everyone had heard of us. We were a brand
Yeah.
name. You pick up the phone and you say you're from Bloomberg. There's automatic kind of authority and legitimacy with customers. And 9 times out of 10, we were dealing with, it was sales and account management, but we were basically upselling and cross-selling into accounts. So it was super easy to some degree. You go in and say, hey, there's this new feature of this new trading platform. Would you like to check it out? Hey, yeah, sure, come by. Oh, have you heard about this product? Also, what are you there? So you've
Yeah.
always got this kind of foot in the door, which was quite nice. But yeah, going into a SaaS environment, it was very interesting kind of from day one. It was very quickly that I realized, okay, this is not the same environment. And it's the sort of place, especially when you're the kind of first person going into the market. And I think I was the 20th person in the company actually at the time. And so it's the sort of place where, yeah, if you're not bringing in results or there's not anything happening or moving, there's nowhere to run and hide. There's no averages across the team. It's very
No,
much
everybody's very transparent. Every time you screw up, it's very out in the open because. And were you the first salesperson there? Were you the first sales guy?
not the first salesperson.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of background about Spendesk. So
Yeah,
Spendesk
for
is
sure.
it's a Parisian-based startup. When I joined, there was about 20 people. There was already some salespeople for the French and the German market, and then obviously a mix of founders and tech and product and so on. Since then, we've grown from about 20 people to over 160. We're now in 4 kind of principal markets. We have offices in 4 markets: London, Berlin, Paris, and now San Francisco. And yeah, so our customers are all over from 31 different countries. So that's kind of a bit of that history. But when I joined, there was actually another person working on the UK market at the time. So we kind of started right in at the beginning, effectively started right from scratch. Started as a SDR, BDR role. That other person didn't stay for too long, and then sort of soon ended up being the only person on the market, becoming a full cycle rep, then going in and hiring a team and building that from scratch.
No, that's that's tough, but at least you had some sales support. So it's not like you had to like build the sales process from the ground up. Like there was still so you went in and like don't get me wrong, I think it's still very difficult to do what you do, but you were sort of building out like the UK version of what was a company that had some momentum. They had product market fit. They did understand like their personas and their ideal buyers. Like that's kind of the level where Spendesk was, but they were just trying to go into different markets and whatnot when you joined.
Yeah, so when I joined, it was a few months before we announced our Series A. So we were kind of still a seed stage company.
Okay.
We didn't really have any customers in the UK. We had a handful and kind of cross customers between Paris that had entities in the UK. But yeah, pretty much it was. One interesting thing about France, there's startups that tend to focus on the French,
Yeah,
France,
of course. Yeah.
the French market. They tend to just focus on there, get really big, and then try and go into other markets. And at Spendesk, it's something that we've had as an ambition from pretty much day one to always be an international company. So, to start with 20 people in the company and start opening up with the UK and Germany right from the beginning, it was quite rare in terms of that ecosystem. And a lot of people thought we were pretty crazy. But I think it was a really powerful thing to do that early on, because you learn very quickly how to go into other environments, other markets, other languages, marketing
Yeah.
style. I mean, if you look at the difference between the German market, French, UK, and American market, just in terms of what works in a selling process, it is completely different. Very, very different.
100%. You have to understand like the cultural nuances of how people buy, especially, and like you don't think like maybe naively if you don't understand that even between European markets there's massive cultural differences, and then as you even grow like further you go like like APAC, you go North America, Latin America, like it's like there's even further, but like even within like Germany, UK, France, like there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration. So that was probably not so easy, and I guess like but the massive, if you can get it right, the potential is massive, right? Because you have the ability to easily go across Europe like very very quickly if you can understand how to take your product to market in different countries. What I wanted to, so I want to go more into how you sort of built out like the commercial organization, but I also just wanted for people listening, what does Spendesk actually do?
Yeah, great question. So the easiest way to think about it is to we help people make payments in the workplace more easily. But to put that into context for people who aren't in finance teams or who wouldn't actually be buyers of the product, we have to spend money in our own personal lives. Just like businesses do. But in our personal lives, it's pretty easy. You take $10, you buy something, or you take your credit card, you purchase it, and you pretty much forget about it. In the working environment, it's very different. There's lots of different types of payments that need to be made. Maybe it's a credit card, it's an expense claim, or maybe an invoice payment. But every time there's a payment that happens in the workplace, there's multiple things that you have to do on top, such as capture receipts, make sure that the right person is able to pay and that they should be paying what they're paying for. And then on the accounting side at the end, to track it and put it to these accounting codes and so on and so forth. So there's a whole and a host of extra things that you have to do in the working environment. Now, historically, most people are managing these sort of things with credit cards, and they're not really built for business spending. So their main kind of value proposition is of credit, for example. So it makes it pretty tough. Now, what we decided to do at Spendesk was to address all these issues and challenges around spend management, which we said we have to build the payment methods ourselves from the ground up. It's that we're going to build them specifically designed for business spending. So we have things like disposable virtual cards that employees can request directly from their own computer when they want to buy a book on Amazon. Also physical cards that can be given if they're going to go to client meetings and these sorts of things. But all of the payment methods are connected to a SaaS platform, which is then controlled by the finance team and adds a layer of control and automation over the process.
So it's really like bespoke for business expensing. Is there anything like that in the market, or are you very much like it's like a blue ocean type? You are literally the first to build anything like this.
It's a really interesting question. When you look at the market historically, businesses have had to spend money for thousands of years to some degree. So there's the way that they do that at the moment, there's a ton of different solutions out there. There's expense management solutions that don't necessarily offer a payment method, or there's credit cards that don't offer software. Yeah. So there's all these kind of different ways in Excel and Gmail and everything else. But we're the first company to come together and say we're going to have one platform centralized that's both useful for the employees and the finance teams, that you can then go and scale your finance operations up.
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, because I'm thinking of all the tools that I've used, and they're all kind of siloed applications that you find a way to jumble together into something that probably looks like a bastardized version of what your actual product looks like. So yeah, that's a very, I can definitely see how that could be useful. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense to me. The product itself makes a lot of sense. So you're tasked with taking this to market in the UK. And you just started as an SDR, BDR, doing full cycle sales. So how did you build out, because this is really industry agnostic, really, building out this commercial organization, building out a sales team eventually. Now you are, I apologize, you're head of US sales now or UK sales now?
Now US, recently transitioned. Okay. So we just raised our Series B with Index Ventures. And with that, we're now doubling down on those existing markets and opening up new markets. And one of those is going to be the US.
And what does that look like? So let's start first, like how you built out a commercial organization. And it could be you and a team of senior leadership. It doesn't matter. I'm still curious. Within the UK. And then how do you take that process and then transpose it into a new market? Is it identical, or is there small nuances now that you do have a developed sales team?
Yeah, sure. So maybe linking back to one of your other questions about the change from Bloomberg and going into a SaaS environment and kind of a rude awakening. So this ties in nicely. When I first started, it was very clear that I needed to come in and create opportunities so that we could then go and close them. I kind of, from working in such a structured environment, I kind of expected, wrongly, to come in, have a system to come in place, send my emails, do my activity, and out would pop a few oppos.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I'm just laughing because, sorry, just to put context, I used to work for Bell Canada, which was an enormous organization akin to It's not international, but it's publicly traded, like akin to the size of Bloomberg. And now I'm working in startup environments, so like everything you're saying is I'm living it. I'm living it. I know.
Oh, it's
But
great.
no, it's all right. Didn't mean to interrupt. Apologies.
No, it's good. So yeah, so we just basically started doing that, and kind of getting some results, but definitely not what we were hoping for at the beginning. And I just remember sitting down with my boss, is Nicholas Marche, our sales revenue director, and he kind of just took me to one side and was like, we're not getting results by doing what you're doing, so you need to effectively figure it out and change what you're doing. I was like, okay, so that's up to me. Okay.
Yeah,
So
useful advice, eh? Well, this isn't working, so what about something else? What is that? I don't know, but something else.
welcome to the startup world.
Yeah.
And so I kind of just jumped into that head first, and started working hard to figure that out. And there was two kind of key dynamics there. So you asked about opening up in different markets, if it's a copy paste and these sorts of things. So when we opened up in France, we were in the French ecosystem community. So if you think of it like your first circle, and then what's your second circle and third circle, the first circle with those friends and family, people and other founders in startups. And Rod, our CEO, was out on his moped around Paris going to people that he knows, and that was the kind of the first 50 customers effectively. But your first 50 is going to get you through your first beta, and it's going to get you first paying customers and so on, and then you can kind of expand out from there. Now, when I came into the UK, we didn't have that at all. We weren't in in the UK ecosystem. We didn't have any brand. We didn't really have any customers either. And I think for the first kind of 3 to 6 months, it was much more of a spray and pray type of play.
Hmm.
Not necessarily intentionally, but we kind of just realized that actually we need to replicate what we've done in the French ecosystem more naturally there, but kind of artificially create that in other markets. So that first started with getting hyper focused on what our ideal customer profile was. So we knew exactly the size of the company that we were working well with, the types of brands, the pain points. We were pretty quick in understanding that side. So we just made sure that, quality in, quality out. If you're contacting a wide range of segments, then you're not necessarily going to get lots of traction. So we kind of got laser focus. And I think that with regard to if that's different for other markets, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that as an approach if you didn't know that you had product market fit. I think for us, we were pretty confident that we had product market fit right from the get-go in the UK market. In other markets, if we didn't have that product market fit, you do want to test lots of segments out to see which ones stick, and then figure out, okay, this is then where we need to get laser focused. But I think our lack of
But that is, I was gonna say that is like when you are required to have a little bit more of a wide approach to identifying your proper product market fit in that environment, you have to be aware that that's going to take a little bit more time to commercialize. So then map that into your projections and map that into your business strategy. Because if you're trying to take on a market and you can't even afford to pay and keep the lights on at home, it's going to be detrimental. So I think that being aware that it's going to take a little bit longer to commercialize in a certain market is important into like your overall strategy. If you don't have that target customer profile, ideal customer profile so defined.
Exactly. And to that point, I think this is some of the issues that sales leaders have, not even necessarily the sales leaders, but working maybe with other CEOs or senior management that aren't in the direct customer facing roles, is when you do go to the market, if you don't have a product market fit, your objective is not to create a scalable sales process. Your objective is to get product market fit, and effectively that sales leader is a medium for communicating with the market and saying, okay, you want to make sure you have a sales leader that can, if a deal is going to be won, they will win it, and if a deal cannot be won, obviously they're going to lose it. But you need to know that if you're not winning or you're not getting traction, it's because of a product market fit issue rather than an execution issue. But at the same time, you need to have that relationship with the senior management to know that this is not a case of how do we build a scalable process. It's how do we make sure we've got those foundations to then build a scalable process on. And then that's, when different kind of objectives. But I think that's where you have to have a very clear from top down to the rest of the teams, what are the objectives in this certain period, and taking it from there.
I like the way you phrase that because I do believe that a CEO that hires a sales leader too early on is looking for that scalable, repeatable, predictable revenue. And they don't understand that perhaps they've hired the sales leader too early if they haven't figured out that product market fit yet.
Exactly.
There's, I always say that you should probably hire a marketing leader before a sales leader to generate demand, and that demand should flow over to the CEO, who should then identify the proper sales opportunity, identify the buyer persona. And then once you have too much demand for the CEO and the close rate is exponentially high, then you can hire a sales leader to build a scalable sales process. But I think that a lot of, I listen to a lot of sales podcasts myself, and like the lifespan of a SaaS sales leader is something like maxed out at 18 months.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's always, sometimes it is the sales leader's fault, but I don't think it always is. I think a lot of it has to do with I'm hiring a VP sales. It's just going to drive my business to the next level. And the CEO isn't aware that a lot of what should be done that he's asking the sales leader to do probably should be done by the CEO first.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And second to that point of the tenure of a sales leader, this is something I speak about fairly often in my posting on LinkedIn, is the kind of difference between growth and a fixed mindset, not just of an individual, but also of a company. And I think that there are a lot of founders that will hire a sales leader with okay, you've done X to X in another company. It's a copy paste because we hire you and you're going to do the same thing there. And that doesn't really work. And it's the case, I think a lot of companies don't create an environment where they hire someone with the capability to learn how to do that in the future and give them the tools to then succeed. And it tends to be the other way around, where it's okay, I expect that you can do this, and the moment I'm seeing signs that you're not getting traction, then we're going to fire you. And that's, I think that is more of a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset at a company kind of level.
Agree. I think that also is such an important point for sales leaders that look for work, like how to, and I don't have a good answer for that, because that's something that sort of comes up in conversation with a lot of people that work in SaaS sales leadership. Like, how do you identify a company when you're hiring that you are aligned on that growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset with the leadership? And if you have any suggestions, I think that would be really valuable. But I think that's something that is something that has to be important. I'm just not sure how to identify that exactly.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's just the same when you interview for candidates to come into the company as a sales leader. You've got a lot of questions about what are you've got fixed growth mindset questions. Tell me a time about when you failed. And if they start blaming things or they don't talk about the way that they've grown, then it's more, fix this mindset. There are certain things like that. But I think, you should do that and challenge the founder on those kind of same sort of things. And I think that our founder Rod is one of the people, and this is again another thing from being in Bloomberg to in a startup world. I was having a discussion over a beer the other day about this. At the beginning, I used to really not like this about Rod, and he was just so honest with everything. And when he didn't know something, he would tell you he didn't know. It's like, where are we going to be at this point? I really don't know. What happens if we fail? Well, we'll have to figure it out at the time. And all these kind of things that
from Bloomberg, that's stressful. That's so stressful coming from Bloomberg. Yeah.
And I just come from this kind of structured environment, and again, it's a fixed type environment mindset wise, but it's okay, this person is talented, they should be able to execute now, rather than seeing that person as, it doesn't matter whether they know how to do that now, they're going to be able to get there and learn their way to that. And actually 2 and a bit years later than I've been in the company, it's actually one of Rod's biggest strengths is the fact that he can hire people and know that they can then grow, and he will hire people who know more about a subject matter than him to make decisions for him. And so it's actually a strength. And I think those are the sorts of things that are really embodied in a growth mindset type of company. But how to get that out before you join, I think you've got to effectively interview them yourself, really.
I think so. Okay, so we went off a little bit. So I just wanted to go back to looping back to where you're taking product to market. And I do apologize because I can't actually remember where we left off. So you want to find that product market fit. I'm just thinking back. So in France, you had this network. In UK, you wanted to artificially recreate that. How did you effectively artificially recreate that environment so that you could be successful?
Yeah. So um, the first thing is we got really focused on those ICPs and those segments.
Mm-hmm.
And so we knew we were lucky because we had more of a product market fit. We knew which ones they were, and that kind of progressively got more concrete over time. So we got very, very focused and said, okay, the next 100 customers that we're going to obtain are going to be in this segment. And that really helped because the kind of metaphor to compare this to is if you were trying to light a fire with a bunch of kindle, but it's very separated out, you might catch fire at one end, but it's going to go out before it catches fire, in itself. So the tighter you can put that together, the more traction you get. And that's when you then can go, okay, into your second circle, you've got to start getting the word of mouth and you go into more traditional industries. So that's definitely how we started doing that on the sales side. We also started to build a community called the CFO Connect community. We mainly sell to CFOs and finance teams. And so it's very important for us to be able to, again, create a community and create value for those people where people are going to talk together, sit together, you start building a brand and really add value outside of just where your product is. And I think that what was quite helpful in being an international company is we'd already started in Paris, we were doing this in Berlin, now London, San Francisco. It's very attractive for these buyer personas because they don't necessarily have a lot of events for them in the kind of startup world. It's very much the CEO or the CTO or the sexy titles, and the CFOs were always kind of left with, not much actually to them, but more and more increasingly, they're extremely important roles within the startup environment. And so we've really focused and doubled down on this CFO Connect community.
It's a very smart strategy. Was that a marketing initiative?
Yes. Yeah. Marketing initiative. And so in marketing now take over that a lot more, but in the early days, there was a much more kind of, sales and marketing going and creating those events and contacting people and leveraging personal connections and so on and so forth. And now we've managed to kind of scale that up and systematize that a lot better.
Very good. Okay, so you build a community, you have your ICP, your personas, you're making some headway in the UK. So is that still you sell at this point in your career? Is this still you selling direct? You're an individual contributor at this point still in the UK, or are you starting to build out your team?
Yeah, so I pretty much was the main person in focusing on full cycle up until about November time when we hired our first SDR. And so pretty much from then onwards, that's when we started hiring and building out the team and growing it from there. So, I mean, you could split that into maybe after the first year, if you like.
Very good. And then when you're building out your team, what are recommendations for sales leaders that switch from individual contributor to hiring their first SDR? Because this was the first time you've hired somebody, correct? Yeah. So
I've made many mistakes.
So what are like some lessons learned that I'm curious?
To go from an IC to more of a management position. I think that my attitude, which was definitely the wrong one, was when I first started moving into more management role, I'd always kind of proud myself on being a good individual contributor and executing well and hitting target and having a high sales or whatever. That was always my kind of focus. As long as I can really contribute to the team in what I'm doing, that's great. It meant that I managed to build a lot of experience and know what did work and what didn't work in that market. But then when we started to hire out a team, I think the issue was my mistake is focusing on trying to just tell people this is what you can do and this is what you should do, and just expect them to be, again, a copy paste of, because you've got the knowledge, you tell them what to do and you expect to kind of see the output at the end of it. And that was completely the wrong focus. And this is why I think often, people say good salespeople don't necessarily make good sales leaders, because they don't necessarily make that transition into, okay, how do I let this person create their own path and empower them to do what they need to do, help remove blockers away from them and figure out what are their strengths and understand how can I motivate this person, rather than just saying this is what you need to do to be successful. It's really about that kind of human relationship. And that was a really big change, and ups and downs and lots of failures along the way, and definitely still learning. I think a book that you probably already read, Radical Candor, was a book that really helped me in management. but also from the point of encouraging my team to be that way with me, and actually sit down and say, okay, Alfie, what's the feedback that we can give you to help you improve? And here's a situation where actually something didn't go the way that we wanted it to, and learning from my team as much as possible, rather than just trying to tell people what's the right thing to do.
No, listen, man. I think you've ramped up and climatized to the role quite quickly. Everything you're saying is very much on point, and I do feel that unfortunately, not a lot of tenured managers are as awoken to the reality of how to be a successful leader as you are in your short time. So that's seriously hats off to you. You've really done well in the role, because everything you're saying is so on point, and that's how you actually lead. Like that is truly how you lead, and that's the issue with sales management, right? Like, you always have the number one contributor. They move into a management role. They don't actually, half the time, they don't even know why they're good at sales. They're just naturally good at running through this activity list that has led them to be successful, but they can't map it out. They can't put it and bundle it up and write it down and codify it and put it into a playbook, which is really, as a leader, you have to be so self-aware of the activities that are going to lead to success, and then enable and remove blockers and all that stuff. So I think that's 100% on point. But it's really good that you were able to learn that, because I know a lot of sales leaders that are much later on in their career that still don't know that. So, but no, that's very good.
Thank you.
So you built out your sales team. Now, is there anything that when you're moving? This is the only other thing that I really wanted to ask about, the strategy for Spendesk. Do you notice any differences when you're moving to a different region completely? So you're moving to North America. You're heading U.S. sales. Are there stark dynamic cultural differences between Europe that you've had to climatize to, or are you still doing the same community creation, same ICP, and it's sort of just like that portion of it is a copy and paste?
Yeah, I think the nuts and bolts tend to stay the same. The systems and the processes, which are the most important things, tend to stay the same, but it's the execution that's different. As I said, with different markets, they focus on different things. For example, in America, you want to have products that are specifically built for the United States. If we have a euro sign on the platform when it should be a dollar sign, that screams, okay, this isn't necessarily built for the US market. There's little things like that, and just kind of processes. So I'd say it's more in the execution, but the overall nuts and bolts and the kind of strategic side, it stays the same. And I think that's what we noticed from doing that in multiple European markets as well, is once you got the formula right, it's more just the execution. And to get the execution right, we really focus on hiring native talent within those markets who can have those relationships and know how to have that correct execution for that particular market.
And is that something I'm curious about, that native talent? Do you hire industry specific, or do you hire like a growth mindset individual that is so excited about learning about something new? Like, what's your ideal, not customer profile, but your ideal hire look like?
I mean, definitely the latter side. We don't really care what they've necessarily the job title has been before, or the industry that they've come from. It's really what they can go on to achieve, and are they really passionate? It doesn't. Again, no one wakes up and says, "I want to sell spend management software for a living," or "I want to be a sales guy."
No one.
That's not necessarily, and I've spoken a bit about this before, like passion is not something that you just find, it's something that you actually have to cultivate and go out there and figure out what you're interested in, and actually cultivate that and have a fascination with something that you can continually improve, but also get economic value out of. So I think, yeah, definitely for the candidate side, it's more about a growth mindset, their passion, their drive. It's also important there's a good cultural fit from, are they a kind and trustworthy person? One of the things that we've really focused on a lot, and it's definitely held true as we scaled up, is we don't have a cutthroat type of sales environment. People aren't holding knowledge or not sharing it amongst their peers. You have top performers who will go out of their way to document their processes so that they can then share them with the team. And it's those sorts of attitudes which are really, really important, and especially in the early days when you're launching a market, because you don't have the you don't have the safety of being averaged out by the rest of your peers.
Yeah. No, I love that culture is important, and I love that you have that culture where knowledge is shared, and like the best practices from top performers is recorded, taught over. I'm very curious how you successfully find that in a candidate. How do you find somebody that fits into that culture? Do you have a question that you like to ask, or a process that you like to follow, or?
Yeah, I think our hiring process is probably notoriously quite comprehensive in terms of the types of questions that we ask, and we go through those deeper layers. In terms of the types of interview questions, it's really about going through 3-4 layers and understanding, okay, so tell me about a time when this has happened, and dig into that, and what did you learn from that? So, one of my favorite ones is asking about what's their biggest failure in life, and figuring out, what is that? Why did you fail? What happened, and why did you fail? Because that really helps people take, when people have a fixed mindset, they're scared of failure, because a fixed mindset, failure is validating that you suck at something, and success is validating that you're really talented, where that's not true. A growth mindset says that failure is just an opportunity to learn. And when you ask that question, you can see it very, very clearly in certain candidates when they are open about talking about failure, and they don't see it as something to kind of defend against. And it's more, what did I learn? How did I grow? And those sorts of things. So that's definitely, a big aspect of that. And I think there's an element of when you speak to someone, you could just feel that connection happen when you ask one sentence and they respond back with a whole answer, and the conversation sort of flows, and they're really passionate about this. If I ask you, what are you passionate about outside of sales or work, and you tell me, and I said, oh, amazing, so okay, photography, tell me a little bit more about that. What's your favorite camera, or what's your favorite photographers? And there's kind of crickets. Then what are you actually passionate about? Because if you're not passionate about what you say you are, how on earth can you be passionate about coming into this company and kind of kicking ass?
I like that answer. I've heard that before. I've heard like the sussing out like how passionate you are about something. It doesn't really matter what. All that it matters is that, like, if you are that passionate, because if you're that passionate about something in your life, then as a sales leader, it's my job to unlock that passion for my organization. And I'll do that for you. I just need to know that you have passion, and then everything else is on me. So I like that a lot. That's very good. What did I want to? Just when you're in terms of, I just like to ask this for sales leaders, and I know it's a little bit of like a such a like a boring question, but I really do like asking and getting different people's opinion on it. What are worst practices you see in sales leadership and sales management that you've seen throughout your career that you really, really think is toxic to culture, environment, the psyche of a sales rep? Like, what have you seen that is really not good?
I think I'm kind of lucky, in to a certain degree, to have had so far a relatively short career. I'm kind of in the early stages of that. So, and I've only worked in two professional environments, that be Bloomberg and Spendesk. So I've been quite lucky to not really experience that much of a toxicity environment, but more from understanding in the people that I speak to. I think it's very dangerous when you set a target and ask someone to kind of execute on a target without getting them invested in the why. Why are we doing this? What's the bigger picture? And also showing them that you're investing time to help them get there. I think it's quite toxic when someone is in a stressed environment, they don't necessarily know how to get to somewhere, and your attitude is, well, you better get there or we're going to fire you. That's just a horrendous attitude to take in general, and not very nice to on the receiving end. But you can have someone who is perfectly capable of getting there in the future if you invest time in understanding how you can help them and what things that they need to work on. So I think that's the kind of like, here's a target, go and do it, and the good performers will do it and the bad ones won't, and that's that. And we'll just, churn out the team and hire some new people. I think that's a very toxic way to think of it, which just the nature of the sort of short-termism in sales, month to month, quarter to quarter, and the pressure from management coming down. It's I understand that, you can't blame these people necessarily from doing that. It's a construct of the environment that they're in. So I think it's everybody's responsibility, from not just the leaders, but the company, to create an environment where you don't create that type of attitude. But having said that, there are also companies that are scaling super quick, and they actually just need to have that. They don't necessarily care in investing in a long-term sales team, because they're happy to churn over SDRs or salespeople, because that's just part of the process. And actually, for them, from a business kind of perspective, I can kind of understand the point, because investing in time where you could just hire someone quickly and fire them when you're growing that quickly, but it's not the way to do it. And you've got to be really careful when you're going into a company to understand which company am I going to. Is this the type of environment that's in? Because if you find yourself in that kind of environment, you should try and get out as quickly as possible.
That was a very good answer. I'm glad I asked that question. That was a really, really good answer. Thank you. No, that's perfect, because I 100% align with that. I don't really have any more like sales leadership management questions. We've been doing this for about 40 minutes now. I want to wrap up, and I want to just ask some sort of like higher level questions to help some people like frame where you are in your career and where you came from. It won't take long to finish this off, but I just wanted to ask, is there anything about sales leadership, building out and scaling a SaaS team, that you think would be a really good point that I didn't hit on?
We didn't speak too much kind of on the actual what it takes to build a good outbound system.
That's true. Do you have a few minutes? And because I forgot about that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So, I think the key thing in an outbound system is you have to be customer centric. So you have to think and speak in the terms of the customer that you're speaking to. And I think that there's some really good LinkedIn content creators out there. For example, Beck Holland has got a load of great stuff on Flip the Script. Josh Braun's got some killer content. He was the ex-head of sales at Basecamp. And the way that they produce the content and frame that is fantastic. And I'm very, very in line with that. When a lot of sales reps, if you focus on outbound, they try and focus in on finding someone with a pain at that time that knows that they've got a pain. And I did a post about this the other day, but if you ask someone, okay, do you have a problem with your commute to work? You're probably going to say no, because you get to work, if you've been doing it, and there's no real problem. So the amount of people in the market that you can actually get to and get a response from is very, very small. If you switch your focus to an education one and speaking in terms of the customer, by firstly really understanding what are the objectives of the people that you're speaking to. And you can do this by going on job searches, type the buyer persona's name and look at the key responsibilities. It will tell you exactly what they're trying to achieve. It doesn't matter about what your product does, but you know their top level. So speaking that first, and then educate them on something that can either prevent them from getting to that responsibility or objective, or a better way of doing things. And if I was to say to you, hey, I'm sure you don't have any problems with your commute to work, but there's actually a way you can click your fingers and you would arrive in 30 seconds, giving you 2 extra hours of your day. Would you like to learn more?
100%. Yeah.
It increases the audience potential enormously, because you're no longer trying to capture people that know they've got a pain or aware of it and know that you could help them. You're now focused on a much wider audience. And this is something, with Spendesk, we're creating a new category. Spend management, as you said before, it's not something that's necessarily heard of. So there's a lot of education that comes involved. And I think if outbound sales reps took that from the beginning, it's really easy. You just have to speak and have conversations with potentially qualified people and educate them on either something that's preventing them from getting where they want, or something that they could help them get even better.
So there's 2 books that you're reminding me of when you say that. The first one would be the Challenger Sales Method, where you're truly challenging and you're highlighting a pain point the customer may not even know they have. And the second one, which I really like, is called Play Bigger, where you're creating your own category. That's one of my favorite books. So
on my book list, and the beer I had the other day with my friend, he bought the book with him and said that you got to read this. So I need to read it.
It's exactly like what you're saying. It is selling to a customer a problem they didn't know they had, and you are the category king, and you are creating a line item on their budget sheet for your product. they reference a lot of like Mark Benioff and Salesforce and the fact that nobody knew they needed a cloud-based CRM solution. They were just purchasing all this on-prem data, data center, servers and whatnot. And then Mark Benioff basically created this category for cloud computing that really didn't exist at that point. Now everybody, right? Like that's all offsite. So that's exactly what you're doing. So that's it's very good. And I think to be aware of that is because you're right. You're not a budget. You're not a line item. Nobody knows about you or anything that you do. You're a mix of a whole bunch of line items right now. It's very good. Very, very good. I like that a lot. And I think that anybody, if you're not if you're a SaaS product, there's a good chance that you are not replacing something, and that what you're doing is going to be in addition to. And I think that's probably one of the most difficult things for people to understand and wrap their mind around, especially coming from big business where like you worked in finance, I worked in telecom. Telecom is a line item. Telecom is always a line item. So if you're not buying it from me, you're buying it from someone else. Doesn't matter. You always have it in perpetuity for forever. Everyone has internet. Everyone has phone lines. Everyone has their hardware and all that stuff. Same with finance. If you're selling to the right buyer, somebody is investing in some trading platform somewhere to do whatever they have to do. So with SaaS, it's much different. Very, very cool.
So true.
Good.
Very, very true.
Very good. All right. So that's an incredible point on outbound. It's not like you're always solving a problem, and that's something that's a really, really good takeaway. So sometimes you have to be the one who's pointing out that problem for your buyer.
Exactly.
Good.
And I think for the biggest thing I think SDRs get scared about is just that kind of rejection of they're not going to have a pain, and that's fine. You're just there as a medium to figure out who actually in that market to have a conversation with, whether it's a good fit or not fit. That's fine. It's just educate the market and try and have conversations with people. And then that simple idea of just open up conversations can happen in many, many different channels: LinkedIn, phone, email, person, whatever. It just doesn't really matter what the channel is. You just need to have a conversation with someone. And so I think that people get so focused on how can I increase my response rate or get my subject line done and everything else. And you kind of forget that you're trying to have a conversation with someone. And there's many ways to do that, especially as technology changes.
Definitely. Some of the best opportunities that I've had in SaaS don't come from people that are actual customers. They come from phone calls of people that conceptualize the software differently than I do, and then they'll take it to a reference or one of their clients or one of their peers, and they're positioning it in an entirely different way than the first 20 people have ever heard it being positioned them to, and then that's another potential opportunity that I've never thought of before. So if you only focus on your open rate and your click through and like your landing page conversions, and you aren't just having these really candid conversations, really building like some of the best sales tactics are just asking for coffee to get feedback from people that it's so helpful.
Like a kind of actionable tip that people can use, especially in going to markets, and especially if they're trying to find product market fit, is once you have a conversation with someone and you demonstrate your product or service, and you've got them kind of bought into what you're doing and the vision, etc. It's always good to ask them. So if you were to describe this product or service to a friend in the same industry who's never heard of us before, how would you describe it? Because when you say that and you hear what they actually give you back, it's absolute gold, because it's in their terminology. It's what they've understood. They will say things that you've never even thought of before. And this is when you can have absolute gold and really then replicate that in your outbound prospecting thereafter. And that's
yes, like you're preaching, like yes. So that's so important for finding product market fit. I also love that approach when you're way past the point of finding product market fit and you're just interviewing your customers. You're interviewing your customers, you're asking them why they bought from you, and then you're including that messaging in your outbound marketing, because they're using keywords that you've never used in your outbound marketing. They're focusing on features that you didn't even think mattered but were there anyways. So that getting that feedback is super, super important.
When we pass over customers to our customer success team, there's almost to a certain degree, our customer success will say, this is where, we can make your dream comes true. So tell me, what are your dreams? And you'll hear them come out with things that they didn't actually tell you in the sales process, because there's more trust in once the relationship has been built and it's the customer success, it's a different team. And it got me thinking, how many sales leaders actually ring up the customers after they've actually closed an account and ask them, why did you buy? Why did you not buy another thing? What was it about us that you actually liked? Because that, I think that when I, again, starting out from the beginning, I had no real idea why people were actually buying versus another reason. And when you're trying to get a product market fit, that's where you really need that information. So you definitely should try and call them up in retrospect.
And plus, like, if they're buying from you, they're going to be brutally honest. They're going to be brutally honest why they're buying from you, because they don't care. There's like, it's not like if you ask a customer who's been ghosting you, who hasn't purchased yet, like, what do you like about our product against a competitor? They're going to lie to you. Like, they're going to come up with some BS because they don't want to hurt your feelings. But after they bought from you, you have their money. They'll be brutally honest. And you can even, on the flip side, you can ask them, what did you not like about the sales process? What did you not like about our product? What did you not like about our company? And because you have their money, they feel no obligation to hold back. So they'll tell you the honest truth, and that's probably the most honest, authentic feedback you're ever going to get. That's great. Very good. Okay, cool. That was really, I'm glad. Thank you for reminding me about the outbound. I know you mentioned at the beginning, and I totally forgot, but I'm really, really glad we brought that up. Okay, so that's okay. So that's all I got for the sales question. That was really powerful. I wanted to ask just a couple things for people that are earlier on in their career. If you were to tell yourself, your 20-year-old self, one thing, probably to do with your profession, what would it be? That one thing that you think would make the biggest impact on your life?
Fail quicker, learn faster. And just have a really open mind. Put yourself in uncomfortable positions and always be pushing your boundaries. And just never take the perspective that you know everything. There's always things to learn. And the quicker you fail, the quicker you learn, and the more that you grow.
Very good. And if you were going to recommend sources of knowledge, could be a person, could be a book, could be a podcast, where would you suggest people go and learn some good things that you've read or listened to?
Yeah, so I mentioned a couple of people earlier. There's Beck Holland, Josh Braun's putting some awesome content out there. Justin Welsh as well, especially if you're looking at building kind of like a LinkedIn brand. I think that in terms of things like statistics and things to know where you're benchmarking yourselves against other companies, companies like Gong and SalesLoft put a ton of research out there, and there's just a bunch of community, Modern Sales Pros, Revenue Collective, and I think LinkedIn is just an absolute gold source of knowledge. Yeah. There's so many people now that are freely sharing really kind of rock star knowledge on there. So you just find those good people and eat up the content.
Yeah, there's ton. You mentioned a couple names that I follow as well that are very, very strong. Like they put out some really, really great stuff. And for me, I don't hyper target as much as some. Like some of the content I put out is a little bit more broad, but I know some people that I enjoyed following. They're hyper targeted on sales or hyper targeted on marketing, and like the stuff they put out is very, very powerful. So I don't know if you're part of the Revenue Collective, but that's something I've always found very useful as well.
One book, I'm not sure if it's particularly famous in the sales world, and I actually found this one from the Marketing Book podcast, which has some great stuff on it. But it's a book called Questions That Sell, and it's from a guy called Paul Cherry. It is one of the best, most influential books in helping myself and our team in the sales process, because the questions is, again, it's all in the execution. It's the types of questions that you ask, and it's the way that you ask them. And it has completely transformed the way that conversations and discovery calls are had, to be able to get all of the knowledge that you need to be able to provide a top class sales process. I'm not sure if it's a particularly kind of famous or well-read one in this kind of SaaS.
I don't know it, but I'm gonna get it now. That's for sure. Yeah. Very cool. Okay. And then lastly, where do people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, LinkedIn's pretty much the easiest place. Alfie Isa Marsh at Spendesk, or you can drop me an email at alfie@spendesk.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. That's all I got.
But man, thank you very much.
All right, that's all I got for today. Thank you again for listening to the Sales versus Marketing podcast, where we speak with sales, marketing, and business leaders. Again, thank you so much, Alfie, for lending amazing insight. If you want to check out this podcast, you can listen to it wherever podcasts are found, including Spotify, iHeartRadio, Acast, Thank you again for listening to the Sales versus Marketing podcast. Thanks so much, Alfie, for lending your insight on all things SaaS sales. As always, you can listen to this podcast wherever podcasts are found, including Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, Acast, and you can also watch it on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe, like, share with your friends, family, colleagues, and peers. I hope you all have an incredible week. Have a productive week, and we will speak again soon. Bye now.